Okay, welcome back to part 2 of this series of why you are struggling to lose fat around your stomach and how to actually do it. If you haven't watched part 1 already, we were talking about how all the conventional methods of trying to lose fat around your stomach, i.e. cutting out carbs, harsh calorie deficits and high intensity interval training, do not work in a kind of women in their 30s and 40s in an executive role where they are working long hours at a desk, because their cortisol is too high, which means your insulin sensitivity increases, your inflammation increases, and that sort of triangle is going to stop visceral fat loss. So before we can go into any other exercise or kind of calorie deficit journeys, or I guess programs itself, you have to try and get to the root cause. So here are the 5 things I would do to try and reduce your cortisol, insulin resistance and inflammation. Number 1, and one of the most important ones, and one that is always overlooked, is that you have to improve your sleep quality. Why sleep drives fat loss for a start? 7 to 8 hours of good quality sleep actually reduces your baseline cortisol levels, and it signals to the body that it is safe to release the stored fat. We spoke about in part 1, kind of going back to the bear attack, or like, you know, the caveman era, where if the body feels unsafe, it's going to store fat around your organs for storage and protection. So 7 to 8 hours of good quality sleep signals to your body that it is safe to release the fat. Sleep also stabilizes your blood sugar, and it improves your insulin sensitivity, which stops that vacuum effect of pulling out the fatty acids from your blood and bringing them into your visceral fat cells from lipoprotein lipase. The other thing is that majority of fat oxidation, so burning of fat, actually happens during your deep sleep stages when growth hormone is at its peak. The problem with people in executive roles is deep sleep is often one of the main components of sleep to be of a lower quality. So again, main thing that we want to try and do is prioritize our sleep here to help aid in releasing fat around our organs. So how are we going to do that? Have a little sleep protocol on the right here. First thing to do is to get into some data tracking using an Aura or a Whoop, ideally. And what we want to do is measure your heart rate variability and your sleep cycles, so things like how long it takes you to fall asleep, your duration, how many times you wake up, and your different stages. After that, or at the same time, I guess, we can metabolically support our sleep by supplementation, taking things like magnesium, B1. B1 helps kind of calm a busy brain, and potassium as well to calm the nervous system. We need to improve our sunlight exposure in the morning. So I know this is really hard to do in the UK, by the way, in winter. Someone actually said that to me about my Instagram post that I made about sleep. I do understand that it gets dark very late in the UK in the winter. So take this with a pinch of salt. But getting natural sunlight exposure first thing in the morning is going to help basically set your circadian rhythm, which means in about 14 to 16 hours time, your body will then send signals that it's time to go to bed. And also as well with circadian rhythm, try not to have caffeine after 1 p.m, especially if you are on an oral contraceptive, because that will basically take longer for the caffeine to get out of your system, which can also affect your sleep. And another really interesting study that was done was looking at cognitive offloading. So there was a study looking at people who wrote a to-do list for the next day before they went to bed. Just a little task of things that they need to get done the next day, and they actually got to sleep 9 minutes faster than the control group. So those would be my pro tips for trying to improve your sleep, and that in turn is going to help reduce cortisol. Going through how I would change up exercise, and this is how I would also do it with my clients as well. The first thing is that we are absolutely non-negotiably going to be doing resistance training. It's going to help build your muscle mass, which is going to be helpful for your whole metabolism. And it also helps to improve that insulin sensitivity, meaning that your glucose disposal is better, which means the sugar on your glucose isn't kind of being stored centrally. It also helps to reduce overall inflammation because of the inflammatory myokines that kind of act against cytokines. So I would be doing resistance training as a priority. The second thing that I'd be doing is zone 2 and 3 cardio. Again, study said that the mode of exercise to burn the most amount of visceral fat was your moderate intensity exercise or your zone 2 and 3 exercise. So what I would do is, do about half an hour at a time in your zone 2, maybe slightly less if it's in zone 3, because that might actually be too hard for some people, and that's absolutely fine. But the main premise is you should still be able to talk whilst you are doing this exercise, but maybe not sing. That's kind of the point you want to be at. Again, really good for already stressed and time poor executive schedules. If you are already stressed, we don't want to be doing the high intensity interval training, because that can be counterproductive and increase the cortisol, like we said. It also is going to be one of those things where a lot of executive women are only able to do exercise after work or maybe later in the evening. And again, if we are doing high intensity interval training later in the evening, then it's also going to affect our recovery and how we sleep. VO2 max testing, just a clinical insight, is going to help identify these specific fat burning zones to make sure that what is actually supposed to be moderate is accurate for your body, and in turn will also help to accelerate visceral fat loss. The VO2 max testing is also part of what I would provide in my offer in my package too. And then from a nutritional standpoint, there are kind of 3 main things that are going to help reduce your visceral fat due to this different mechanisms which we can go through now. So the first one is omega-3 fatty acids. Now, the main role of omega-3s is to help improve inflammation. Inflammation is worsened by omega-6s, or the bad fats that we eat in our diet. So the more omega-3s that we can eat, the better it is for reducing inflammation and helping the overall fat breakdown. The best sources of omega-3 include things like oily fish, salmon, mackerel, sardines. Walnuts have been very well researched, and chia seeds as well. Second thing that we want to try and improve in our diet is our polyphenols, and these are your blueberries, raspberries, dark chocolate, green tea, and extra virgin olive oil. And this is just going to help with your overall gut microbiome, but also aid in fat metabolism itself. The third thing to try and add more of is sulforaphane. And the best kind of food group that you can have that contains sulforaphane is broccoli sprouts. It actually contains about 20 to 100 times more sulforaphane than broccoli head itself. So look out for broccoli sprouts. But this is also going to help improve your insulin signaling, which again, if we go back to part 1, the big triangle as to why you are not able to get rid of your visceral fat is the cortisol, insulin resistance, and inflammation. And just because I have a big love for extra virgin olive oil and because it's been studied so much, extra virgin olive oil actually acts as a natural anti-inflammatory, and has also been compared in a study to, I think it was just once some sort of seed oil, but both patients had the same amount of calories of the oil and were in the same calorie deficit, but they actually lost, I think it was 20% more fat whilst having extra virgin olive oil. So aiding fat metabolism, helping with inflammation, and fat metabolism. Goodness. And just a very quick what not to do. I would not cut out carbs completely, because it again spikes cortisol and is going to impair recovery. I would not try and do long fasting. It's going to do the same thing. Having some sort of short fasts in the day. I know that a lot of executive and entrepreneurs like to do their deep work in the morning before they've eaten to kind of have less brain fog. And that's absolutely fine as long as you kind of have enough food the rest of the day. I'm talking more like the 48 to 72 hour fast is definitely not something you should be doing. And just the overall hard calorie deficits like we spoke about already. Lovely. Next thing that we're looking at is leveraging NEAT, or your non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So this is basically all the calories you burn throughout the day whilst you are not exercising. And it could be things like if you are someone to tap your foot on the floor, how far away you live from a train station, if you're taking stairs versus if you're using lifts, etc. All those sort of things. And this is kind of like an invisible driver for visceral fat loss. For high stress executives, it's probably a very good leverage, a metabolic marker for you to leverage, because it bypasses that kind of cortical spiking threshold that you get from exercise, intense exercise. It often exceeds a calorie burn of a single HIIT session as well, if you are doing certain things throughout the day to try and improve your non-energy exercise thermogenesis. A non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Goodness me, get my words mixed up. And some practical implementations you can do here, like I said, try and take the stairs versus taking escalators or lifts. Getting off the tube or a bus stop one away from where you're supposed to be getting off and walking the rest. Utilising a standing desk or a walking desk is going to be really useful as well. And doing some strategic errands, so doing things like click and collect instead of deliveries. Beautiful. And just a clinical insight as well, research shows that NEAT is the prime reason as to why two people with the same diet and formal exercise routine can have vastly different visceral fat levels. Lovely. Now we're just going to look at what you should be measuring and why it's good to kind of get into medical testing. First thing that I'd recommend getting done is a DEXA scan. Obviously, I'm a DEXA scan consultant, so I'm very pro measurements. But that is the way that we can measure the amount of fat around your organs to the gram, and we can actually see if you are creating meaningful changes. It also looks at things like your lean mass and how many calories you burn at rest, and how many calories you burn day to day, and that is the most accurate way of working out your caloric intake. Obviously, if you want to lose visceral fat, the best way to do it is to be in a very mild calorie deficit whilst eating the foods that we put on the screen already. And when you get a DEXA scan, we can make sure that we are not in a very in a very big deficit. The other thing that I recommend doing is getting a blood panel for some of these metabolic markers of high visceral fat or high cortisol, really I should say. And that would be your fasting insulin, serum cortisol, DHAs, CRP, and HbA1c. All those things kind of give you a different kind of variation of inflammation, recovery, and cortisol, I guess. And like I always say, if you aren't measuring, you are just guessing. So I would absolutely go and do that. Because the BMI scale, stepping on the scales or looking in the mirrors itself is just not an accurate way to be measuring your visceral fat. And a little action plan for the week if you are finishing this video thinking, I'm not quite sure how I'm going to improve this myself. Book a DEXA scan, get a baseline assessment, see where you are. I think that's a really, really good way to establish what you should be doing. Second thing, if you don't have a wearable, it will be something that I would consider buying to be tracking your sleep and ensuring we're getting enough. I'll be replacing high intensity session with a moderate zone 2 and zone 3. Finding time for a resistance training session a week if you have one. Ordering more foods higher in polyphenols, so pyruvanes and omega-3s, and also writing tomorrow's to-do list the night before bed and seeing if that's going to help you fall asleep. If you'd like to know more about my offer, Precision Health, which is working with executive women in their 30s to 50s, doing all this kind of baseline measurement in a done-for-you matter, then please check the link in my bio.